this edition of Back in History, we narrate to you the events that led to the removal of Ernest Shonekon from office as interim president of Nigeria and the takeover of power by General Sani Abacha. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. Ernest Shonekon rose to power in the most unusual manner in the history of Nigeria. He was appointed as interim head of state by General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida in 1993. Such nomenclature had never been heard of in the entire stretch of the history of Nigeria until Ernest Shonekon was so appointed. The office of interim head of state was invented by General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida's regime through the promulgation of Decree No. 61 of 1993. Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida had been in power as military president of Nigeria for several years, having taken over power from Major General Muhammadu Buhari in the military coup of 1985. Nigerians had become tired of Babangida's grip to power and thus demanded for return to civilian rule. Babangida yielded to the demand and had started putting structures in place for transition to civilian rule. The Electoral Commission was formed, and Professor Humphrey Nwosu, a renowned professor of political science, was appointed as the chairman of the commission. Elections were scheduled and held across the country, and in the end, MKO Abiola of the Social Democratic Party, SDP, had the majority of lawful votes cast in his favor and was at the verge of being declared as the winner of the election when the election was annulled by the military administration of Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. This action sparked violent protest and condemnation across the country and internationally. Military President Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida was in the center of the storm, and the seat of power became too hot for him to continue in office. Two situations thus emerged. One, the election had been annulled, and by implication, there was no civilian president to take over from the military head of state. Two, the citizens of the country, civilians and military, had become tired of Babangida's grip to power and wanted him out at all costs. Babangida tested the opinion of his loyalists in the army, and the feedback pointed to the fact that even his key men were no more comfortable with him in office. Retired military officers who still had their boys in the army were also not comfortable with the situation in the country. At this point, Nigeria was at a crossroad, and anything was possible, including a military coup to remove Babangida from power. Babangida perfectly understood the situation and was thus in a dilemma of how best to navigate his way and hand over without putting the country in any form of leadership quagmire or vacuum whatsoever. This is where the idea of an interim national government came to the fore. Ernest Shonekon was considered the most suitable person for the interim national government, owing to his impeccable pedigree in the corporate world and also owing to the absence of previous involvement in partisan politics by him. Babangida must have had private discussions with him on this assignment, to which Shonekon would have agreed. A military decree known as Interim Government Basic Constitutional Provisions Decree No. 61 of 1993 was signed into law, and Ernest Shonekon was appointed as the interim head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Nigeria. His core mandate was to organize election and see to the successful transition of power to an elected civilian administration. Babangida then announced to the world on August 17, 1993 that he would, quote, step aside as military president of Nigeria as, quote, a personal sacrifice. On August 27, 1993, he made good his promise and stepped aside, together with his service chiefs. Ernest Shenekon was then sworn in by Honorable Justice Mohammed Bello at the Presidential Villa in Abuja. Justice Bello was the Chief Justice of Nigeria at the time. The initial plan was to make the interim national government a purely civilian body. But it turned out that there were two senior military officers in the body. General Sani Abacha, who was appointed into the interim national government as Secretary for Defense, and Major General Nasco, who was appointed as Secretary for the Federal Capital Territory. There were 32 members of the interim national government in all. The members were known as secretaries, the equivalent of ministers in a civilian administration. The inclusion of Abacha in the interim national government was a cause of concern for some persons who knew Abacha very well. Recall that Abacha was Babangida's Chief of Army Staff and Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. It is thus possible that most of the appointments in key military formations were either made by him or made on his recommendation. Abacha was obviously a man of tremendous influence in the military circles, hence the fear expressed in some quarters about his inclusion in the interim national government. In the decree granting powers for Shenekon to function as head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, it was stated that in the event of the death of Shenekon or resignation by him, the most senior secretary will take over from him. This next most senior secretary was General Sani Abacha. Shenekon went to work and tried his best to steady the ship of Nigeria. He held cabinet meetings from time to time and took necessary decisions for smooth governance and transition to elected civilian administration, being the core mandate of the interim national government. But Shenekon had so much to battle with. The legitimacy or constitutionality of his administration became a central point for national and international discourse. There were civil unrest and strikes in several places. There was also a judgment of the Lagos State High Court declaring Shenekon's interim national government illegal. Shenekon was also unable to command the armed forces. As a matter of fact, the armed forces had little or no respect for him. Abacha was quietly keeping record of these events and planning to strike in a matter of time. Exactly 82 days into Shenekon's administration, Abacha struck. This time, in the most peaceful and most clinical manner. Not a single bullet was fired, nobody was killed, no blood was shed, no noise was made. But a coup took place and there was a change of power. How did it happen? At about 10 o'clock in the morning of 17th November 1993, General Sani Abacha, Secretary of Defense to the interim national government, arrived at Sorok in the company of Lieutenant General Oladipo Dia, who at the time was the Chief of Defense Staff. Also in that company was Lieutenant General Aliyu Mohammed, who was the Chief of Army Staff. They went into the villa to have a discussion with Shenekon, and waiting outside for them were truckloads of fully armed soldiers brought to the villa by Abacha. Colonel Lawan Gwadebe, the commandant of the National Guard, and Brigadier General Bashir Magashi, commander of the Brigade of Guards, were stationed by Abacha to keep watch over the troops outside and command them as appropriate. Abacha had given them a script to act, and they were not expected to deviate from it. Recall that there was a clause in Decree number 61 which allowed the next most senior secretary in the interim national government to take over from Shonekon in the event of Shonekon's resignation or death. This clause was effectively utilized by Abacha, who compelled Shonekon to resign with immediate effect and allow him to take over. Throughout his lifetime, Shonekon never granted any press interview nor wrote any book to reveal the details of the conversation that took place behind closed doors at the villa when the trio of Abacha, Oladipo, and Aliyu met in his office. But it has been reported by those that were close to these officers that Shonekon was compelled to hand over the reins of power without any delay whatsoever. He was given a rare opportunity to deliver a farewell speech and resign his appointment as head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Nigeria. Shonekon did as directed and made the following speech, unquote. Fellow colleagues of the interim national government, I have summoned you this evening on an unusual occasion. Earlier today, I met with the Secretary of Defense in the company of the Chief of Defense Staff and Chief of Army Staff, and we discussed the state of the nation. They expressed serious concern about the general uneasiness in the country and the apparent lack of stability over the past 3 months. They spoke about the restiveness of the rank and file in the military. You will recall that today is our 82nd day in office, having been sworn in on August 26, 1993. Needless to say that we have all worked together to the best of our ability and as a coherent team. I want to put it on record that I have enjoyed the period we worked together in the interim national government. It is common knowledge that the interim national government is a child of circumstance. It was conceived in crisis and born in crisis. Distinguished colleagues, the interim national government has tried very hard to bring honor to government and has taken steps to campaign against the incidents of corruption and indiscipline in the society. Several times I have publicly acknowledged the collective transparency and integrity of this cabinet. Let me say loud and clear that we have all made sacrifices for these past 82 days in the strong belief that our country deserves the best. I have an unshaken faith in the promise of Nigeria, and I believe that the best is yet to come. However, I regret to inform you that in the light of the recent events and after due consideration of all the facts, I am left with no option but to take the most honorable and dignified step of resigning with immediate effect my appointment as head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Nigeria. Once more, I thank you very much and hope that the fellowship we have shared in this past period will continue to be the basis of good memory for long. May God bless you all and long live the Federal Republic of Nigeria. With the resignation unquote of Shonekon, the coast became clear for Sani Abacha to take over the reins of power. Abacha then took over the reins of power while Shonekon was flown back to his base in Lagos. Abacha immediately addressed the nation in a national broadcast as follows, unquote. Fellow Nigerians, sequel to the resignation of the former head of the interim national government and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, Chief Ernest Shonekon, and my subsequent appointment as head of state and commander-in-chief, I have had extensive consultations with the armed forces hierarchy and other well-meaning Nigerians in a bid to find solutions to the various political, economic, and social problems which have engulfed our beloved country and which have made life most difficult to the ordinary citizen of this country. Chief Ernest Shonekon took over as head of state and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces at a most trying time in the history of our country. Politically, economically, and socially, there were lots of uncertainties. Things appeared bleak, and the atmosphere was heavy with uncertainties. However, driven by a belief in himself, his countrymen, and love for his country, he accepted to face the challenges of our time. I will therefore like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to him for his selfless service to the nation. He showed great courage at taking on the daunting task of heading the interim national government, and even greater courage to know when to leave. We require well thought out and permanent solutions to the problems of the country if we are to emerge stronger for them. This regime will be firm, humane, and decisive. We will not condone or tolerate any act of indiscipline. Any attempts to test our will be decisively dealt with. For the international community, we ask that you suspend judgment while we grapple with the onerous task of nation building, reconciliation, and repairs. This government is a child of necessity with a strong determination to restore peace and stability to our country, and on these foundations, enthrone a lasting and true democracy. Give us a chance to solve our problems in our own ways. Long live the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Abacha was a professional broadcaster of cool speeches and was as calm as one can imagine in the broadcast of this very speech. He presented himself in the speech as a man who was fully in charge. Back in history, it was Abacha who announced the removal of President Shehu Shagari and the takeover of government by General Muhammadu Buhari. It was also Abacha who announced the removal of General Buhari and the takeover of his government by Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. It was also Abacha who announced the crush of Gideon Oka's coup. Abacha was a participant in all successful military coups in Nigeria, beginning from the coup that removed Ironsi from power in July 1966. And like a well-scripted movie, the coup master finally announced himself as the military head of state of Nigeria. Born in Kano on 20th September 1943, Abacha attended the Nigerian Military Training College, Kaduna, and was commissioned as second lieutenant in 1963. Upon the completion of his training at the Mons Officer Cadet School, Aldershot, England, he served as Chief of Army Staff in Babangida's administration and was also the chairman, Joint Chief of Staff Committee. He was the only known officer in his time who climbed to the rank of general without skipping any rank. He was second lieutenant in 1963, and in 1966 he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant. In 1967 he was promoted to the rank of captain, and in 1969 he was promoted to the rank of major. He became a lieutenant colonel in 1972 and became a colonel in 1975. In 1980 he became a brigadier general, and in 1984 he became a major general. In 1987 he became a lieutenant general, and in 1990 he became a general. Abacha died in office as military head of state of Nigeria on 8th June 1998 at the age of 54. Abacha was married to Mariam, and their marriage was blessed with 9 children. Thank you for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to the channel for regular notifications.